Welcome to this journey into the shadows of history, where documented facts meet unexplainable events, and where beauty became something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Before we begin, I want to know, where are you watching this from? And what time is it right now? Are you alone in the dark, or do you have company? Drop a comment below. Let me know you're here with us, part of our community that dares to explore these forgotten corners of American history. Today, we travel back to Louisiana in 1861, just months before the outbreak of the Civil War. The cotton plantations stretched endlessly across the humid landscape, and the institution of slavery remained the brutal economic engine of the South. But this story is not about politics or battles. This is about something far more intimate and terrifying. This is the story of Céleste Marchand, 23 years old, described in auction records as having skin like polished mahogany, eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets, and a face so beautiful that grown men would stop mid-sentence just to stare. But Céleste was not just beautiful. She was dangerous in ways that no one could explain. Between January and August of 1861, Céleste was sold 5 times. 5 different plantations, 5 different owners. This was unprecedented. Enslaved people were expensive investments, rarely resold unless they proved to be troublesome, physically incapable, or prone to escape attempts. But Céleste never tried to run. She never caused visible trouble. In fact, witnesses said she was obedient, quiet, almost eerily compliant. Yet every single man who purchased her died, not after years, not after months. Within weeks of bringing Céleste into their homes, 5 plantation owners met violent, inexplicable deaths. Deaths that defied rational explanation, deaths that left widows terrified, communities whispering, and local authorities utterly baffled. The first death could have been an accident, the second, a terrible coincidence. But by the third, people began to understand that something was profoundly wrong. By the 5th, Céleste's name was spoken only in whispers, and the enslaved communities who lived alongside her knew to keep their distance. What was it about this woman that turned obsession into a death sentence? Was she a calculating murderer who used her beauty as a weapon? Was she practicing dark arts learned from her grandmother in the Caribbean? Or was she something else entirely? A vessel for ancient justice, a curse personified, a supernatural force that punished those who dared to claim ownership over another human soul. The records are fragmentary. The truth has been buried for over a century and a half. But the documents that survive tell a story so disturbing, so impossible to dismiss, that it demands to be told. This is not just a ghost story. This is documented history that reads like a nightmare. Auction receipts, death certificates, witness testimonies, newspaper clippings, diary entries written by terrified women who watched their husbands become strangers in their own homes. And at the center of it all stands Céleste Marchand, silent, beautiful, and absolutely deadly. By the time you finish listening to this story, you will have to decide for yourself what you believe, because the evidence points in multiple directions, and the truth, if there ever was a simple truth, has dissolved into legend and fear. But I warn you now, once you know Céleste's story, you won't forget it easily. Some images stay with you, some questions have no comfortable answers. So let me take you back to Louisiana in 1861, to a world of moss-draped oak trees, oppressive heat, and the constant undercurrent of violence that defined plantation life. Let me show you the documents that survived. Let me introduce you to the men who died, and the woman who was present for every single death. Are you ready? Then let us begin with the first sale, the first death, and the first indication that Céleste Marchand was not like anyone else who had ever walked those Louisiana roads. To understand Céleste's story, we must first understand the world she inhabited, a world built on systematic cruelty, where human beings were bought and sold like livestock, where families were torn apart for profit, and where the legal system existed primarily to protect those who enslaved others. Louisiana in 1861 was one of the wealthiest regions in the United States, its prosperity entirely dependent on enslaved labor. Cotton was king, and the plantations that stretched along the Mississippi River and throughout the Bayou country represented massive concentrations of wealth. A single large plantation might hold hundreds of enslaved people, and the owners lived in grand mansions, while those who generated their wealth lived in cramped, brutal conditions. The auction houses of New Orleans were infamous. Human beings stood on wooden platforms while buyers examined their teeth, their muscles, their ability to work. Women faced particular horrors, as their reproductive capacity was considered part of their economic value. Beauty, especially in women, could be both an asset and a terrible curse in this system. Céleste Marchand first appears in the historical record in a New Orleans auction house ledger dated January 7, 1861. The entry is brief but specific. Age, approximately 23. Origin, Saint-Domingue, now Haiti. Physical condition, excellent. Special notations, French-speaking. Literate, trained in household service. That last detail is significant. Literacy among enslaved people was rare and often illegal. Teaching an enslaved person to read and write was criminalized in most southern states by 1861. Yet Céleste could read and write in both French and English, suggesting an unusual background. The notation also mentions her origin, Saint-Domingue. This is crucial. Saint-Domingue was the French name for Haiti, and by 1861, Haiti had been an independent nation for nearly 60 years, following the only successful slave revolution in history. The Haitian Revolution had terrified southern plantation owners, who lived in constant fear that their own enslaved populations might rise up in similar fashion. Many Haitians fled to Louisiana after the Revolution, bringing with them not only the French language and Catholic traditions, but also the spiritual practices that had helped sustain resistance. Vodou, brought from West Africa and blended with Catholic imagery and indigenous Caribbean traditions. Whether Céleste herself was born in Haiti or was descended from Haitian refugees is unclear from the records. But that notation, Saint-Domingue, would have marked her as potentially dangerous in the eyes of Louisiana slaveholders. The very word Haiti conjured images of successful black resistance, of white plantation owners killed in their beds, of a world turned upside down. And yet, someone bought her. That someone was Monsieur Henri Laveau, owner of the Bel Ombre plantation, located 40 miles northwest of New Orleans. Henri Laveau was 52 years old, married for 28 years to Madame Constance Laveau, father to 4 children, and by all accounts a harsh but successful plantation owner. His holdings included 137 enslaved people, 1,500 acres of cotton, and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. The purchase price for Céleste was recorded as $1,200, a significant sum, well above the average price for an enslaved woman. The high price suggests that something about her was considered exceptionally valuable. Her beauty was noted in the auction record, described in language that makes modern readers deeply uncomfortable, but was standard for such documents at the time. Henri Laveau brought Céleste to Bel Ombre on January 9, 1861. She was assigned to work in the main house rather than the fields, a position that carried its own dangers. Enslaved women who worked in close proximity to white families faced constant threats of sexual violence and had no legal recourse or protection. What happened next was recorded in fragmentary but consistent accounts. Within days, according to the diary of Constance Laveau, Henri began behaving strangely. He would stare at Céleste during meals. He would find excuses to be in whatever room she was cleaning. He began neglecting his plantation duties, spending hours simply watching her work. Constance wrote in her diary on January 18th, "My husband has become a stranger to me. He speaks of nothing but that woman. He looks at her as though enchanted. I have tried to reason with him, but he grows angry when I mention her. Something is deeply wrong in this house." The other enslaved people at Belle Ombre noticed as well. Later testimonies, collected decades after these events, describe an atmosphere of dread. Céleste moved through the house silently, her expression always neutral, her eyes unreadable. She spoke little, she never smiled, and wherever she went, Henri Laveau followed. The overseer of Belle Ombre, a man named Thomas Broussard, later testified that Henri began making bizarre decisions. He suddenly freed several enslaved people without explanation, an almost unheard-of act in that time and place. He gave away money to people who approached him on the road. He stopped attending church. He wandered the plantation at night, sometimes standing for hours outside the quarters where Céleste slept. Constance, terrified and humiliated, wrote to her brother on January 29th, "I fear my husband has lost his mind. Or worse, that he has fallen under some dark influence. I do not trust that woman from Haiti. There is something in her eyes that is not natural. The servants whisper about her. They say she practices dark arts. They say she has done this before." That last line is particularly chilling. They say she has done this before. On February 3rd, 1861, less than a month after purchasing Céleste, Henri Laveau was found dead in the plantation's cotton warehouse. He had drowned in 3 inches of water, in a wooden trough used for washing tools. The death made no sense. The warehouse was locked from the inside. Henri was a strong man, fully conscious when he entered the building. There were no signs of struggle, no marks on his body, no evidence of foul play. The local doctor who examined the corpse could offer no explanation beyond accidental drowning, though he noted in his report that such an accident seemed highly improbable under the circumstances. Céleste, when questioned, said nothing. She claimed she had been in the main house all night, corroborated by other servants. She expressed no emotion at Henri's death, no tears, no relief, nothing, just silence and those strange ancient eyes. At the estate sale that followed, Céleste was sold again. The buyer was Monsieur Etienne Robichaud, and he would not survive the month. The death of Henri Laveau might have remained an isolated tragedy, a strange accident filed away in local records and eventually forgotten. But what happened next transformed a single mysterious death into a pattern that would terrify the Louisiana countryside. Etienne Robichaud was different from Henri Laveau in almost every way. At 38, he was younger, unmarried, and known for his cold business sense rather than any particular cruelty. He owned the Petit Paradis plantation, a smaller operation specializing in sugarcane, located near the town of Saint Martinville. Etienne attended the Belle Ombre estate sale, specifically to purchase enslaved workers for the upcoming harvest season. According to the auction record, he initially bid on 3 field workers. But when Céleste was brought to the auction block, something changed. Multiple witnesses later reported that Etienne became fixated on her immediately. He outbid 2 other potential buyers, eventually paying $900, less than Henri had paid, but still a substantial sum, especially for someone who needed field laborers rather than house servants. His plantation manager, a free man of color named Baptiste Chevalier, later gave testimony to local authorities describing what happened after Céleste arrived at Petit Paradis on February 6, 1861. Baptiste stated, "Monsieur Robichaud was not the same man after that woman entered his house. On the first night, he ordered that she be given the best quarters, far better than what was appropriate. He brought her into the main house immediately, though he had no wife and no need for a house servant. Within 3 days, he stopped coming to the fields. Within a week, he stopped seeing anyone at all except her. Baptiste's testimony continues. I went to the main house on February 14th to discuss urgent plantation business. Monsieur Robichaud refused to see me. Through the window, I saw him sitting in his parlor, and she was standing behind him, her hand on his shoulder. He was staring at nothing. Just staring. His face was empty, like a man in a fever dream. I called his name, but he did not respond. She looked at me through the window, and I tell you honestly, sir, I felt cold fear run through my body. Her eyes were not the eyes of any normal person. Other workers at Petit Paradis reported similar observations. Etienne stopped eating regular meals. He was seen walking the grounds at night, sometimes in his nightclothes, sometimes barefoot in the mud. He began talking to himself, or perhaps to someone no one else could see. His account books, later examined, show that his handwriting deteriorated dramatically during this period. The careful script of an educated businessman devolved into erratic scrawls. The final entry, dated February 23rd, reads simply, "She knows what I have done. She knows all of it. There is no escape from judgment." On February 24th, 1861, Etienne Robichaud was found dead in his bedroom. He had been strangled. But here is where the case becomes truly impossible to explain. The door to his bedroom was locked from the inside. The windows were shuttered and barred, also from the inside. No one could have entered or left the room. When Baptiste and 2 other men broke down the door, they found Etienne on his bed, his face purple, deep bruises around his throat, consistent with manual strangulation. But he was alone, completely alone. The room showed no signs of struggle. Nothing was disturbed. No objects were out of place. The local sheriff, a man named Céleste Marchand, conducted an investigation. His report, preserved in the St. Martin Parish archives, documents a death that should have been impossible. Sheriff Marchand wrote, "The deceased shows clear signs of strangulation by human hands. The marks on the throat indicate strong fingers pressing deeply into the flesh. However, there is no rational explanation for how such an attack could have occurred in a locked room with no other person present. I questioned all inhabitants of the plantation. The woman called Céleste was in the servants' quarters all night, confirmed by 4 witnesses. She could not have been in the room. Yet the physical evidence indicates murder." The report concludes, "I can offer no determination in this case. The death is consistent with homicide, but the circumstances make homicide impossible. I recommend that the woman called Céleste be removed from this property immediately, as there is widespread belief among the colored population that she is connected to this death through supernatural means, and so Céleste was sold again, the 3rd time, to Monsieur Jean-Baptiste Thibault, owner of the Rivière Rouge plantation near Bro Bridge. News of the 2 deaths had begun to spread through the network of plantation owners, but Jean-Baptiste Thibault was skeptical of superstition. A practical man in his mid-40s, he believed the deaths were coincidental, perhaps the result of natural causes misidentified by incompetent local doctors. He believed he could succeed where others had failed, that he could keep Céleste without falling victim to whatever curse or madness had claimed the previous owners. He bought her for $600 on March 2nd, 1861. The decreasing price suggests that potential buyers were becoming wary, but Jean-Baptiste was confident. He was not a man given to obsession or flights of fancy. He had no interest in Céleste beyond her labor value. He assigned her to work in the kitchens, kept her far from his personal quarters, and believed he had taken proper precautions. He lasted 12 days, the pattern repeated with horrifying precision. Jean-Baptiste began appearing distracted during his daily routines. His wife, Marguerite Thibault, wrote to her sister on March 8th, "Jean-Baptiste speaks her name in his sleep. He denies going near the kitchen quarters, but I have seen him standing outside the building at dawn, just standing there, watching. He has never been a superstitious man, but something about that woman has infected his mind." On March 10th, Jean-Baptiste stopped eating. He claimed he was not hungry, that food tasted like ash in his mouth. By March 12th, he was not sleeping. Servants heard him pacing his room all night, muttering in French and occasionally crying out as if in pain. On March 14th, 1861, Jean-Baptiste Thibault fell down a flight of stairs in his own home and broke his neck. It happened in broad daylight. Several people were in the house at the time, but no one saw him fall. No one heard anything until his body was discovered at the bottom of the staircase, his neck twisted at an impossible angle, his eyes wide open and staring. Céleste was questioned again. Again, she had an alibi. She had been in the kitchen with 3 other workers at the exact time of the death. She could not possibly have pushed him or caused the fall in any physical way. But Marguerite Thibault, now a widow, did not care about alibis or physical evidence. She demanded that Céleste be removed from her property immediately. She told the sheriff, "That woman is death itself. She does not need to touch you to kill you. She gets inside your mind. She makes you see things. She makes you do things." My husband was terrified of her in his final days, yet he could not stop seeking her out. It is as if she cast a spell on him, drew him to his destruction like a moth to flame. Now, before we continue with the 4th and 5th deaths, I want to pause and ask you something. What do you think is happening here? Are we looking at a woman who has somehow learned to commit perfect murders, leaving no evidence? Are we seeing genuine supernatural forces at work? Or is there another explanation I have not yet mentioned? Tell us in the comments what you think is happening so far. Your theories matter to this investigation, because what comes next is somehow even stranger than what we have already witnessed. By late March 1861, Céleste Marchand had become infamous throughout Louisiana's plantation society. 3 men had purchased her. 3 men had died within weeks. The pattern was undeniable, yet no one could explain it, and more importantly, no legal grounds existed to charge her with any crime. She had alibis for each death. She had never threatened anyone. She had never been seen doing anything remotely criminal. But fear spreads faster than reason. The sale of Céleste after Jean-Baptiste Thibault's death proved difficult. No one wanted to purchase her, regardless of price. Auction houses in New Orleans refused to list her. Private sellers turned away inquiries. For several weeks she remained in legal limbo, technically the property of Marguerite Thibault's estate, but unwanted, feared, and isolated. Then Monsieur Charles Dufresne made an offer. Charles was 56 years old, owner of the modest Chêne-Moor plantation near Opelousas. Unlike the previous buyers, Charles had a reputation for cruelty. He used the whip freely, separated families without hesitation, and was known to discipline enslaved people with particular brutality. Perhaps he believed his reputation would protect him. Perhaps he thought fear was stronger than whatever power Céleste possessed. He purchased her for $300 on March 28, 1861. Half the price Henri Laveau had paid just 2 months earlier. The declining value reflected the growing dread surrounding her. Charles Dufresne made a critical mistake. He believed he could break her. According to testimony from other enslaved people at Chêne-Moor, Charles intended to make an example of Céleste. He wanted to prove that she was not supernatural, not cursed, not anything more than a woman who needed to understand her place. He assigned her to field work, the most brutal labor available. he publicly announced that any disobedience would be met with severe punishment. Céleste worked in the fields without complaint. She never resisted. She never spoke unless directly addressed. For the first few days, it seemed that Charles had succeeded where others had failed. But on the fourth night after her arrival, Charles began screaming. His wife, Henriette Dufresne, later gave a deposition to local authorities that is preserved in the Opelousas courthouse archives. Her testimony is particularly detailed and disturbing. "My husband woke in the middle of the night, screaming that there were hands around his throat. I lit a candle and saw no one else in our room. He clawed at his own neck, gasping for air, his eyes bulging. I tried to help him, but he pushed me away with such violence that I fell. He kept screaming, 'She is here, make her stop.' But no one was there, only him and his terror." This happened 3 nights in succession. Charles refused to sleep, convinced that something invisible was trying to strangle him in the dark. He armed himself with a pistol and a knife. He ordered guards to stand outside his bedroom door. He had all the windows sealed shut. None of it mattered. On April 3rd, 1861, Charles Dufresne was found dead in his locked bedroom, a knife buried in his own chest. His right hand was still gripping the handle. He had stabbed himself with such force that the blade had penetrated completely through his body and embedded in the mattress beneath him. Suicide was the official ruling. But those who saw the body reported details that made that conclusion difficult to accept. Charles's face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror. His left hand was raised defensively, as if warding off an attack. And most disturbing of all, there were marks on his throat. The same kind of strangulation marks that had appeared on Etienne Robichaud weeks earlier. How does a man strangle himself and then stab himself through the heart? The local priest, Father Antoine Rousseau, was called to perform last rites. In his private journal, discovered decades later in church archives, Father Rousseau wrote about his encounter with the scene. "I have seen death in many forms, but what I witnessed in that bedroom shook my faith to its foundation. Monsieur Dufresne's corpse bore the marks of both suicide and murder simultaneously, an impossibility that my eyes could not reconcile with my understanding of God's creation. The air in that room felt heavy, oppressive, as though something malevolent lingered there. I prayed over the body, but I confess my prayers felt hollow, as if they could not penetrate whatever darkness had claimed that space." Father Rousseau also documented his brief interaction with Céleste after Charles's death. "I encountered the woman called Céleste as I was leaving the plantation. She stood in the yard, motionless, watching me. I felt compelled to speak with her, to offer spiritual counsel, or perhaps to discern whether she truly was connected to these horrors. When I approached, she looked directly at me with eyes that held no fear, no guilt, no emotion whatsoever. I asked her if she feared for her soul. She responded in perfect French, 'Father, I have no soul left to fear for. It was taken from me long ago, along with everything else.' Then she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with a chill in my bones that I feel to this very day." After Charles Dufresne's death, no one wanted to purchase Céleste. She represented financial loss, guaranteed death, and potential legal liability. The sheriff of St. Landry Parish, where Shenmore was located, considered taking her into custody, but on what charges? Being present when men died? That was not a crime. Having alibis that proved she could not physically have committed murder, that exonerated rather than implicated her. For 3 weeks, Céleste remained at Shenmore, working the fields alongside other enslaved people who were terrified of her. According to later testimonies, they would not speak to her, eat near her, or sleep in the same quarters. She was completely isolated, moving through her days in eerie silence. Then, in late April, a man named Armand Beausoleil arrived at the plantation. Armand was unlike the previous buyers. He was only 31 years old, educated at schools in France, and considered eccentric by Louisiana plantation society. He had inherited his father's estate, the Ombre Éternel plantation near Lafayette, but was known more for his interest in books and what he called natural philosophy than for agricultural success. Armand believed he understood what was happening with Céleste. He believed in mesmerism, in the power of the human mind to influence others, in psychological phenomena that the medical establishment was only beginning to recognize. He theorized that Céleste had somehow learned to manipulate men's minds, to induce a form of hysteria that led to self-destructive behavior. He bought her for $150 on April 26, 1861, a fraction of her original price. He brought her to Ombre Éternel with the intention of studying her, documenting her methods, and ultimately proving that supernatural explanations were unnecessary. Armand kept detailed journals of his observations. These journals were discovered in the 1920s in an attic in Lafayette and are now held by the Louisiana Historical Society. They make for disturbing reading. April 27. Céleste is extraordinarily beautiful, but more than that, she possesses an unusual quality of stillness. She moves through space like a ghost, making no unnecessary sound. Her eyes are alert but reveal nothing. When I speak to her, she responds politely but minimally. I detect no hostility, no seduction, no attempt to manipulate. If she is a killer, she is the most subtle one I have ever encountered. April 29th. I have been having unusual dreams. In them, I am underwater, drowning slowly. I see faces around me, faces of people I do not recognize, all of them suffering. I wake gasping for air. This is likely due to the stress of this experiment rather than any external influence. May 31st. The dreams are worsening. Last night, I dreamt that Céleste was standing at the foot of my bed, though I know she was locked in the servants' quarters as I myself secured the lock. In the dream, she spoke to me in a language I did not understand, yet I knew she was telling me about all the men who had owned her, all the violence they had committed, all the cruelty they had inflicted. I woke with tears on my face. May 4th. I am beginning to understand. She does nothing, she simply exists, and her existence reflects back to each man whatever darkness lives in his own heart. The others were cruel men, guilty men, men with blood on their hands. They saw in her a mirror of their own evil, and they could not bear what they saw. But I am different. I am a good man. I will not fall victim to whatever psychological mechanism claimed the others. May 6th. I was wrong. I am not a good man. I have done terrible things, things I have hidden from myself, justified, rationalized away. She makes me see them. When I look at her, I see every enslaved person I have owned, every family I have separated, every child I have sold away from their mother. I see the violence that sustains my entire life. I see that I am no better than Charles Dufresne or Henri Laveau. I am perhaps worse, because I believed I was enlightened while participating in the same evil. May 38th. I cannot sleep. I cannot eat. The house feels like a prison. I am the prisoner. I have always been the prisoner, trapped by my own complicity in this monstrous system. She stands in the yard below my window, and I know she is waiting, not to kill me, to watch me destroy myself with the weight of my own guilt. May 10th, 1861. This was Armand Beausoleil's final journal entry, written in a shaking hand that deteriorated into illegible scrawls by the end. She told me tonight that she does not need to hurt anyone. The guilt does it all. The guilt we carry for what we do to human beings, for treating them as property, for justifying the unjustifiable. She said her grandmother taught her how to make men see the truth, how to make them see what they really are. And once they see it, truly see it, they cannot live with themselves. I understand now. I understand everything. and I cannot bear it. Armand Beausoleil hanged himself from an oak tree on his property on May 11th, 1861. His body was discovered the following morning. In his pocket was a note that read simply, "Forgive me, I could not forgive myself." After Armand's suicide, the Louisiana legal system finally took action, not because they believed they could prosecute Céleste successfully, but because community pressure demanded that something be done. 5 men had purchased her. 5 men had died. Whether through murder, supernatural means, or psychological manipulation, the pattern could not be ignored. On May 15, 1861, Sheriff Claude Marchand, who had investigated Etienne Robichaud's death months earlier, rode to Ombre Eternel with 2 deputies to take Céleste into custody. The charge was intentionally vague: suspicion of involvement in unnatural deaths. There was no legal precedent for such a charge, but the sheriff hoped that holding her in jail while seeking guidance from state authorities might break the deadly pattern. What happened next has been documented in the sheriff's official report, newspaper accounts from the Lafayette Advertiser, and sworn testimonies from multiple witnesses. When the sheriff and his deputies arrived at Ombre Eternel, they found Céleste waiting in the yard, standing exactly where she had been reported to stand during Armand's final days. She offered no resistance when they placed her in shackles. She said nothing during the entire ride to the Lafayette Parish Jail. The jail was a small brick building with only 4 cells. Céleste was placed in the most secure cell, the one typically reserved for the most dangerous criminals. The sheriff himself locked the door and posted a guard. Outside the building, the guard, a man named Thomas Hebert, provided sworn testimony about what occurred that night. "I sat outside the jail from sunset until past midnight. It was a quiet evening, no wind, no unusual sounds. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, I heard singing coming from inside the building. It was a woman's voice, singing in a language I did not recognize. Not French, not English, not Spanish. Something else, something old. The song was beautiful and terrible at the same time. It made my skin crawl, but I could not stop listening." Thomas continued. "Then the singing stopped and there was complete silence. I waited for perhaps 10 minutes, then decided I should check on the prisoner. I unlocked the front door and entered the jail. The cell where we had placed Céleste was still locked. The lock showed no signs of tampering, but when I looked inside the cell, it was empty. Completely empty. She was gone. A thorough search was conducted. The cell's lock had not been picked or broken. The small window, barely large enough for a child to fit through, was still barred and intact. There were no tunnels, no loose bricks, no conceivable way for anyone to escape from that cell. But Céleste was gone. Sheriff Marchand organized search parties that combed the surrounding area for days. Bloodhounds were brought in, neighboring parishes were alerted, notices were posted offering a reward for information leading to her capture. She was never found. The Lafayette Advertiser published a brief article on May 18, 1861. The woman known as Céleste Marchand, lately held on suspicion regarding several mysterious deaths, has escaped from parish custody under circumstances that defy explanation. Sheriff Marchand states that the cell was locked and secured, yet the prisoner vanished during the night hours. Local residents are advised to report any sightings immediately. Questions remain unanswered regarding this peculiar case. But that was not the end of Céleste's story. Or perhaps it was just the beginning of her legend. In the weeks following her disappearance, reports began filtering in from across Louisiana and even neighboring states. A woman matching Céleste's description was allegedly seen in Natchitoches, walking the roads at dusk. Another report placed her in Mississippi, standing at the edge of a cotton field, watching workers labor under the brutal sun. A steamboat captain claimed a woman matching her description boarded his vessel at Baton Rouge, paid her passage in coins he later discovered were dated from the 1790s and disappeared before the boat reached Natchez. Were these genuine sightings, cases of mistaken identity, or something else entirely? The reports were never confirmed, but they continued sporadically throughout 1861 and into 1862. More disturbing were the rumors that spread through the enslaved communities across the South. Whispered stories told of a beautiful woman who appeared when cruel masters needed to face justice, a woman who never aged, who could walk through locked doors, who carried the spirits of all those who had suffered under slavery's yoke. Some called her an angel of vengeance. Others called her a hoodoo woman with powers inherited from African gods. Still others believed she was the physical manifestation of guilt itself, taking human form. One particularly detailed account comes from a formerly enslaved woman named Ruth Adams, whose testimony was recorded by abolitionists in 1863 after she escaped to the north. Ruth had worked at Belle Ombre, Henri Laveau's plantation, and had known Céleste during her brief time there. That woman was not like the rest of us. She had old knowledge, the kind that came from across the water, from the homeland. My grandmother recognized it in her eyes, said Céleste carried her grandmother's spirit with her, and her grandmother's grandmother all the way back. Said every woman in her line had learned how to make evil men see their own evil. Not with poison, not with weapons, just by being present, by reflecting back what they tried to hide from themselves. The guilty cannot look at her without seeing their own sins, and some sins are too heavy to bear. Ruth continued. When I heard she escaped from that jail cell, I wasn't surprised. You cannot cage something that is more spirit than flesh. She came to punish the ones who needed punishing, and when her work was done, she moved on. Probably still out there somewhere, appearing where she is needed most. The Civil War began in April 1861, just as Céleste's story was unfolding. Within months, the entire social order of the South was convulsed by conflict. Plantations were abandoned, records were lost or destroyed, and the systematic documentation that might have provided more definitive answers about Céleste simply ceased to exist. By the time the war ended in 1865 and slavery was abolished, the story of Céleste Marchand had already faded into legend and folklore. The men who had owned her were dead. The plantations where she had lived were in ruins or under new ownership. The legal records that might have definitively proved or disproved various theories about her methods had been scattered or destroyed. What remains are fragments, testimonies that contradict each other, theories that cannot be proven, and 5 graves of men who died within months of purchasing the same woman, a woman who was present for each death, yet could never be tied to any of them through physical evidence. Was Céleste Marchand a brilliant, calculating murderer who used beauty, psychological manipulation, and perhaps knowledge of poisons or drugs to destroy the men who enslaved her? Was she a practitioner of genuine supernatural arts, wielding powers inherited from African and Caribbean spiritual traditions? Or was she something even stranger? A catalyst who made guilty men destroy themselves simply through her presence, reflecting back to them the monstrosity of their own actions until they could no longer bear to live with what they had become. The historical record cannot answer these questions definitively, but it can confirm this much. 5 men purchased Céleste Marchand. 5 men died, and she vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions, fear, and a legacy that still haunts Louisiana folklore to this very day. The story of Céleste Marchand might have remained buried in fragmentary 19th century documents, known only to a handful of local historians, if not for a series of discoveries made decades after her disappearance. These later findings add new dimensions to the mystery and raise as many questions as they answer. In the autumn of 1923, a graduate student named Marcus Washington, at what was then the Colored Normal School in New Orleans, was conducting research on enslaved families in Louisiana. While examining documents at a private estate sale, he discovered a leather journal tucked inside a trunk of old papers. The journal belonged to a woman named Josephine Marchand, dated 1839 to 1843. The journal was written in a mixture of French and Creole, and it detailed the life of a Haitian family that had fled to Louisiana following political upheaval in Haiti. Josephine described her daughter, a girl named Céleste, born in 1838 in Port-au-Prince. According to Josephine's entries, the family belonged to a line of Vodou practitioners extending back generations. Josephine wrote extensively about teaching her daughter the spiritual traditions of their ancestors, including practices she called the mirror work, a form of spiritual reflection that could make people confront their own hidden nature. One passage, dated March 1842, reads, "I have taught Céleste the sacred knowledge, though she is still so young. She understands that we do not curse or hex those who wrong us. We simply hold up the mirror. The evil ones destroy themselves when they finally see what they truly are. This is ancient justice, the kind that cannot be escaped or denied." Josephine's journal ends abruptly in late 1843. Marcus Washington searched for additional records of the family, but found only a single notation in a New Orleans registry. Josephine Marchand died of fever in December 1843. Her daughter Céleste, approximately 5 years old, was sold to settle estate debts. If this Céleste was the same woman who appeared in the 1861 records, she would have been 23 years old at the time of the plantation deaths. Exactly, matching the age recorded in auction documents. Marcus Washington published his findings in a small academic journal in 1924. His article suggested that Céleste Marchand had been separated from her mother at age 5, had spent nearly 2 decades enslaved under various owners, and may have retained and developed the spiritual practices her mother had begun teaching her in childhood. But Washington also raised troubling questions. What happened to Céleste between 1843 and 1861? If she possessed these dangerous abilities, why did she not use them sooner? Were there other deaths, other owners that went unrecorded or were attributed to natural causes? In 1954, a folklorist named Dr. Elizabeth Thornton conducted oral history interviews with elderly black residents of rural Louisiana as part of a Federal Writers Project initiative. One interview, with a woman identified only as Mrs. L.B. of St. Martinville, age 93, contains a startling claim. Mrs. L.B. stated that her grandmother had worked at the Petit Paradis plantation in 1861 and had known Céleste Marchand personally. According to Mrs. L.B., her grandmother had told her stories about Céleste throughout her childhood. "My grandmother said that woman was touched by the spirits, said she had been treated so badly since she was a child that part of her died, and what filled that empty space was something old and powerful. Said Céleste didn't have to do anything to the masters who bought her. They did it to themselves. All she had to do was be near them, and their own guilt would eat them alive." Mrs. L.B. continued, "Grandmother said Céleste could make you see things, not hallucinations but the truth. She could make you see every person you had hurt, every family you had torn apart, every evil thing you had ever done. And for men who had done the things plantation owners did, that truth was worse than any poison. They couldn't live with seeing themselves clearly." Dr. Thornton's interview notes indicate that Mrs. L.B. also claimed her grandmother had seen Céleste one more time, years after the events of 1861. Grandmother said she saw Céleste in New Orleans in 1867, just after the war ended. said she was standing near the old auction house where they used to sell people, just standing there watching as they tore it down. Grandmother went up to her and said, "Celeste, is that you?" And the woman turned and looked at her, and grandmother said her eyes were exactly the same, old and sad and knowing. The woman said, "My name is not important, but yes, I remember you. You were kind to me." Then she said, "They are tearing down the auction house, but they cannot tear down what was done here. The ghosts remain. I remain." And then she walked away into the crowd, and grandmother never saw her again. Dr. Thornton attempted to verify this account through historical records, but found no documentation of Céleste Marchand in New Orleans in 1867. The story remains unconfirmed, but it added to the growing legend that Céleste had somehow survived and continued to exist long after her disappearance from the Lafayette jail. In 1978, a construction crew working on a highway expansion near Breaux Bridge unearthed what appeared to be remnants of an old cemetery, likely from the mid-19th century. Archaeological excavation revealed it to be a burial ground for enslaved people, probably connected to one of the plantations that had operated in the area. Among the graves, researchers found one that stood out. Unlike the others, which were marked with simple wooden crosses or unmarked entirely, this grave had a small iron marker with an inscription in French: "Ici repose celle qui reflète." Here rests she who reflects. No name, no dates, just that cryptic phrase. Beneath the marker, instead of a body, the researchers found a small wooden box. Inside the box were several objects: a tarnished silver medallion engraved with symbols associated with Haitian voodoo, a lock of human hair tied with red thread, and a piece of paper with writing in faded ink. The paper contained a message in French, which translated reads, "To those who seek to understand, she was not a murderer, though she stood beside 5 graves. She was not a witch, though she practiced the old ways. She was justice personified, made flesh through suffering, and knowledge passed down through generations. She did not kill, she revealed. And what was revealed could not be endured by those who had built their lives on cruelty. Remember her not as a monster, but as a mirror. We laid this marker, though no body rests here, for her body was never found. But her spirit remains wherever injustice demands witnesses." The note was unsigned and could not be definitively dated, though analysis of the paper and ink suggested it was likely from the late 19th or early 20th century. The medallion and other objects are now held in the Louisiana State Museum's collection, catalogued as artifacts related to 19th century spiritual practices, possible connection to Céleste Marchand case. Even into the 20th and 21st centuries, occasional reports surface of a woman matching Céleste's description, appearing in historically significant locations related to slavery and racial injustice. In 1963, during the Civil Rights Movement, several participants in a sit-in at a former slave market in Charleston, South Carolina, reported seeing a young black woman in old-fashioned clothing standing across the street, watching silently. Multiple witnesses described her as having an ageless quality and eyes that had seen too much. She was there for several hours, never moving, never speaking. When activists approached her to ask if she wanted to join the demonstration, she simply smiled sadly and said, "I have been demonstrating for a very long time," then walked away and disappeared into the crowd. In 2001, a tour guide at a former plantation in Louisiana that had been converted into a museum reported encountering a woman in period clothing who was not part of any tour group. The guide asked if she needed directions, and the woman responded, "I know this place well. I have been here before, though it looked different then." When the guide turned to get a map, the woman was gone. Security cameras showed no one entering or leaving the building at that time. Are these sightings of Céleste Marchand cases of mistaken identity, elaborate hoaxes, or something else entirely? The legend has taken on a life of its own. Divorced perhaps from whatever historical truth underlies it, Céleste has become a symbol in African American folklore, a representation of resistance, of hidden power, of justice that operates outside the law when the law itself is unjust. But the question remains, was there ever really such a woman? And if there was, what exactly was she? We have reached the end of this investigation, but we have not reached the end of the mystery. Perhaps we never could. The story of Céleste Marchand exists in that shadowy space where documented history blends with legend, where facts become inseparable from folklore, and where the truth remains forever elusive. Let me present you with the evidence one final time. Stripped of narrative embellishment, between January and May of 1861, 5 plantation owners in Louisiana purchased the same enslaved woman. Within weeks of each purchase, each man died under circumstances that ranged from highly unusual to completely impossible. The woman, Céleste Marchand, was present for each death, but could never be directly connected to any of them through physical evidence. She disappeared from a locked jail cell in May 1861 and was never conclusively seen again, though reports of sightings continued for decades. These are the facts we can confirm through historical documents. Everything else is interpretation, theory, and speculation. So let me offer you 3 possible explanations, 3 ways to understand what happened in Louisiana in 1861. Theory 1, the master poisoner. Perhaps Céleste was a brilliant, calculating murderer who used her knowledge of toxins, herbs, and drugs to kill the men who enslaved her. The Caribbean and African traditions her mother practiced would have included extensive knowledge of plants and their effects on the human body. She may have induced hallucinations, paranoia, and self-destructive behavior through carefully administered substances that left no trace in the medical examinations of the time. Her alibis were carefully constructed. Her escapes were aided by networks of enslaved people who helped her disappear. She was human, mortal, and extraordinarily clever. A woman who turned the only weapons available to her into instruments of lethal justice. Theory 2, the spiritual practitioner. Perhaps Céleste genuinely possessed supernatural abilities inherited from generations of Vodou practitioners. The mirror work, described in her mother's journal, may have been a real spiritual practice, a way of psychically forcing people to confront their own guilt and evil until they literally could not bear to continue living. She did not kill with her hands, but with something far more powerful, the ability to strip away the psychological defenses that allow cruel people to justify their cruelty to themselves. When those defenses crumbled, self-destruction followed inevitably. Her disappearance from the jail was genuine magic, and she may still exist in some form, appearing where she is needed. Theory 3, the psychological catalyst. Perhaps Céleste did nothing at all, nothing supernatural, nothing criminal. Perhaps she was simply a woman whose presence, whose beauty, whose silent dignity triggered something in the men who purchased her. These were men who participated daily in a monstrous system, men who had to construct elaborate psychological justifications for treating human beings as property. Céleste's existence challenged those justifications. Perhaps obsession grew from guilt. Perhaps the strange behaviors reported by witnesses were manifestations of psychological breakdown when confrontation with one's own evil became unavoidable. Perhaps these men destroyed themselves, and Céleste was merely the catalyst, innocent of any crime except existing in a way that made evil men see themselves clearly. Which of these theories is true? I cannot tell you. The historical record supports elements of all 3. While proving none of them definitively, What I can tell you is this: Céleste Marchand's story, whether factual, legendary, or some combination of both, represents something profound about the era in which it took place. It speaks to the hidden resistances that existed within slavery, the ways enslaved people found power even in the most oppressive circumstances, and the psychological weight that systems of cruelty place on those who perpetuate them. To this day, no one knows the full truth about what happened in Louisiana in 1861. No one knows what became of Céleste Marchand. No one can prove or disprove the supernatural elements of her story. But 5 men died, that much is certain, and their deaths remain unexplained despite extensive documentation and investigation. The graves of Henri Laveau, Etienne Robichaud, Jean-Baptiste Thibault, Charles Dufresne, and Armand Beausoleil can still be found in cemeteries across Louisiana. They are real graves, marked with real names and real dates. Whatever else in this story might be legend, those men were real, and they died in the spring of 1861. And somewhere, in archives and attics and historical societies across the South, documents remain that mention a woman named Céleste Marchand, a woman whose beauty was legendary, a woman whose presence brought death, a woman who vanished without a trace. Was she victim or perpetrator? Human or something more? Innocent witness or supernatural avenger? You have heard all the evidence I could find. Now I ask you, what do you believe? Tell us your theory in the comments below. Do you think Céleste was a poisoner, a spiritual practitioner, a psychological catalyst, or something else entirely? Your interpretation matters. Your theory could be the one that finally makes sense of this mystery. If you found this story compelling, if it left you with questions and chills and a desire to explore more of these dark corners of American history, then subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Join our haunted community of people who seek the truth behind the legends, who are not afraid to look into the darkness and ask difficult questions. Next week, we will journey to another time and place where documented history collides with the unexplainable, where official records cannot account for what witnesses claim to have seen, where the line between the real and the supernatural dissolves into shadow. Until then, remember, history is full of stories that never made it into the textbooks, stories that were too strange, too frightening, too impossible to explain. Stories like Céleste's. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the past. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay with us as we continue to explore the mysteries that history tried to forget. This has been another investigation into the unknown. I'll see you in the next one.